Pam Bondi sees an elderly man using sticks as crutches. What she does next will change everything. The man could barely walk. His legs shook with every step, and the only thing keeping him from collapsing were two old, splintered sticks, makeshift crutches that looked ready to snap any second. People walked past him like he was invisible. No one stopped, no one cared. But then, she saw him. Pam Bondi. At first, she hesitated. Was he just another drifter, another forgotten soul left to the streets? Then something caught her eye, something that made her heart pound. It was his hands. They were covered in deep scars, old wounds that told a story no one had bothered to ask. That's when she made a decision. She was going to help him, but what she didn't know was that this man was hiding a secret so shocking it would turn her world upside down. And by the time she found out the truth, it was too late to turn back. Pam Bondi had seen hardship before. As a former prosecutor, she had put criminals behind bars, fought for justice, and stood up for those who had no voice. But something about this old man made her stop in her tracks. He wasn't just struggling, he looked defeated. His clothes were torn, his face lined with exhaustion. He was gripping the sticks so tightly his knuckles had turned white. She could have walked away. She could have kept moving, just like everyone else. But then, he looked up. His eyes, that's what did it. They weren't the eyes of a beggar. They weren't the eyes of a man who had given up on life. They were the eyes of someone running from something. Pam knew that look. Fear, desperation, a silent scream for help. Something told her that this wasn't just an old man on the streets. Something was very wrong, and she was about to find out just how deep this went. Pam took a step closer. "Sir, do you need help?" she asked, keeping her voice calm. The man flinched, not like someone who was just startled, but like someone who had been hurt before, someone who expected danger. "I'm fine," he muttered, tightening his grip on the sticks. But he wasn't fine. Pam could see it. The way his legs trembled, the way his breathing was uneven. He was in pain. She wasn't going to push him, but she also wasn't going to walk away. "Let me get you some real crutches," she offered. That's when it happened. The man's face changed. His tired eyes flickered with something fear, urgency. He shook his head, stepping back. "No doctors, no hospitals," he said quickly. Pam's instincts kicked in. This wasn't just an old man in need. He was hiding from something. "Okay," she said carefully. "No hospitals, just food, a place to sit." He hesitated, his fingers twitching against the wood. Then finally he nodded. Pam led him toward a small cafe down the street. People kept staring, whispering, wondering why a well-dressed woman was helping a man who looked like he had nothing. But Pam didn't care about any of that. What she did care about was the way he kept looking over his shoulder, like he was being followed, like someone might come for him at any second. And when she finally got him to sit down and take a sip of water, she saw it. The scar, peeking from under his sleeve, running up his wrist, a deep, jagged scar, the kind that doesn't come from an accident. Pam recognized it instantly, because it was the kind of scar she had seen before, the kind of scar left behind by handcuffs. Pam's mind started racing. That wasn't just any scar. She had seen it on too many wrists before, men who had spent years behind bars. But this man, he didn't carry himself like a criminal. He wasn't angry, he wasn't aggressive, he was afraid. She leaned forward, keeping her voice steady. "What's your name?" The man hesitated, his fingers curled against the table, knuckles white. Then just above a whisper, he said, "James." Pam nodded. "James, are you in danger?" His breathing hitched. For a split second, he looked like he was about to break. But then, just as fast, he shut down. He pulled back, shaking his head. "I shouldn't be here. I need to go." Pam saw it in his eyes. He wasn't just scared, he was hunted. And then, just as she was about to press further, the door opened. A man walked in, tall, clean-cut, expensive suit, the kind of man who didn't belong in a small cafe on this side of town. And he wasn't alone. Another man followed, standing near the entrance, blocking the door. Pam felt James tense beside her. His breathing turned shallow. His hands shook. He knew them, and they knew him. The man in the suit scanned the room. His eyes landed on James. A slow, knowing smile crept onto his face. Pam's stomach dropped. This wasn't random. They had found him. James pushed back his chair so fast it screeched against the floor. "I have to go," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Pam grabbed his arm. "Who are they?" But he didn't answer. He was already moving, gripping his makeshift crutches, struggling to stand. The man in the suit took a step closer, and that's when Pam saw it. Just for a second, hidden beneath his jacket. A gun. She had seconds to make a choice. Let James go and risk never seeing him again, or do something reckless. She took a breath, and then, without thinking, she did something she would have never done in her years as a prosecutor. She reached for James, and she ran. Pam's heart pounded as she yanked James toward the back exit. She wasn't thinking, just moving, acting on pure instinct. Behind them, chairs scraped against the floor. Heavy footsteps followed. They burst into the alleyway, the scent of damp concrete filling the air. James gasped, his breath ragged. He could barely keep up. His legs buckled, and Pam tightened her grip on his arm. "Just a little further," she urged. James shook his head, his body trembling. "Hugh, you shouldn't be doing this," he rasped. Pam ignored him. She turned a corner, pulling him into a narrow gap between two buildings. The sounds of their pursuers echoed in the distance. James leaned against the brick wall, his face twisted in pain. "Why are you helping me?" Pam didn't know. All she knew was that everything in her gut told her she couldn't leave him behind. "I've spent my life putting criminals away," she said, her voice low. "But you're not a criminal, are you?" James looked at her, his eyes shining with something she couldn't quite place. Then he whispered, "I was never supposed to get out." A chill ran through Pam's spine. Get out of where? James swallowed hard. Prison. Pam's pulse skipped. She had seen wrongful convictions before. Men who had spent decades in cells for crimes they didn't commit. But James, something about him was different. Before she could press him further, a loud voice rang out from the alley entrance. "James." Pam turned. The man in the suit was standing there. His gun was still hidden, but his posture said everything. Calm, in control, like he already knew how this would end. James tensed. His fingers twitched. His body was screaming run, but he couldn't. The man smiled. "You've caused a lot of trouble, old friend." Pam's stomach clenched. Old friend. James' breathing turned shallow. His entire body had gone rigid. This wasn't just some random pursuer. Whoever this man was, he knew James, and that meant James had been lying. Pam had risked everything for a man she didn't even know. Pam's mind raced. She had seconds to decide. The man in the suit took a slow step forward, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. "We've been looking for you, James," he said, his voice calm. "Did you really think you could hide forever?" James' breath hitched. His grip on the wooden sticks tightened. "I didn't run," he muttered. "You know I didn't run." Pam's stomach twisted. What did that mean? The man's smirk deepened. "That's not what the world thinks, though. And that's all that matters." Pam felt a cold chill run down her spine. She had spent years in the justice system. She knew when someone was being hunted, when the truth didn't matter, only the story people were being told. She turned to James. "Tell me what's going on now." James clenched his jaw. He looked like a man standing at the edge of a cliff. Then finally, his shoulders sagged. "I was framed," he whispered, 22 years ago, for something I didn't do." Pam swallowed hard. James lifted his sleeve, revealing another scar, this one newer, redder. "They let me out last week, not because I was exonerated, but because they thought I was dying." Pam's throat tightened. "They dumped me in a halfway house, expecting me to disappear." His voice cracked. "But I found something I wasn't supposed to see." The man in the suit exhaled, shaking his head. James, always so dramatic." Pam turned toward him, her pulse hammering. "Who are you?" she demanded. He smiled. "Someone cleaning up a mess." Then he reached into his jacket. Pam's heart stopped. James tensed. "Run," he whispered. "You have to run." But Pam didn't move. She had a choice. She could walk away, leave James behind, and pretend none of this had ever happened. Or, she could fight. Pam's fingers twitched. Her mind screamed at her to turn and run. But she didn't. She had spent her life chasing justice, exposing the truth, protecting people. And now, standing in that dark alleyway, with a man who had spent decades locked away for something he didn't do, she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't leaving him behind. The man in the suit pulled out his gun, tilting his head. "You should have minded your own business." Pam's eyes darted around. No exits. Nowhere to run. James inhaled sharply, his hands trembling. "Pam, whatever happens, don't let them take me." Pam locked eyes with him. "They won't." And then before the man could react, she lunged. A sharp crack echoed through the alley. The screen goes black. Silence. Then, a single breath, a heartbeat, and one final whisper before the video ends. "It's not over." What happens next? Who really framed James? And why are they so desperate to keep him quiet? If you want part 2, hit that like button, and leave a comment below. Trust me, this story is far from over.